Welcome to the realm of science fiction, where imagination knows no bounds and extraordinary stories unfold. Enjoy the adventure. Jace Corwin lived like most people died, quietly in the forgotten dark between stars. His ship coughed more than it flew, held together by welds, spit, and an aging AI that spoke only when insulted. Every morning started with a syringe of grey, nutrient paste and a prayer to whatever gods loved fools who hunted relics in dead war zones. He wasn't a hero, he was a salvager, a ghost in the graveyard belt, where the bones of ancient fleets drifted like ash on water, remnants of wars, so old the winners had forgotten why they fought. Each scan was a gamble. Most days brought nothing but hull rot, radiation shadows, and maybe a rusted heat coil worth half a credit. But this was different. The ship appeared like a hallucination. No power signature, no distress call, just a massive dreadnought-shaped absence where there should have been noise. He circled it 3 times, waiting for traps or warning flares. Nothing. Its hull was intact, seamless, silent, too perfect. Too still. The coordinates weren't on any chart. It shouldn't exist. Which meant one of 2 things. Either it was buried for a reason, or it was waiting. And Jace, idiot that he was, couldn't resist either. Jace passed through corridors, carved from living alloy, that reflected faint pulses of violet light, each footstep echoing like rumors in a mausoleum. His helmet lamp swept across geometric wall panels that quivered once, then stilled, as if the ship dreamed behind sealed eyelids. Deeper within, a single door responded to his biometric presence, unfolding like a metal blossom to reveal a circular vault. In its center floated a crystalline sarcophagus, flawlessly clear except for spider veins of silver script that glimmered with ancient authority. Inside the crystal, a woman taller than any human, limbs slender as artistry, hair suspended in amber, suspension fields. Symbols along her collarbone spelled a name nobody had spoken since the Orion collapse. A Selyri, last of an empire that burned the quadrant and vanished. Curiosity overrode caution. Weeks alone in vacuum-black silence had frayed his sense of boundaries. Awe felt like oxygen. Condensation blurred the glass. He wiped it away with a gloved palm and breathed onto the surface just to watch the fog bloom. Sleeping beauty. He chuckled to the void. Bet your people charged admission. On impulse, he pressed a quick mocking kiss to the cold barrier, a heartbeat of nothing. Then crystal seams glowed gold, lock glyphs rippled open, energy conduits roared awake. Systems. Across the dreadnought surged from dormancy to fervor. The sarcophagus petals unfolded, releasing a rush of ion-sweet air that tasted like thunder. Somewhere in the darkness, something began to breathe. Alarms didn't blare. There wasn't time. The crystal prison pulsed once with a deep, internal shudder, and then the biolock snapped open like jaws unclenching after a 1,000-year yawn. Heat surged through conduits buried in the walls, and the dead ship groaned as ancient systems sparked to awareness. What had slept was no longer asleep. Jace stumbled backward, heart hammering as the door sealed behind him with a hiss of pressurized intention. The pod split open like a blooming predator. Mist flooded out in ribbons. The air thickened, gravity buckled. Static hummed at the base of his skull. And then she rose. Her form emerged from the smoke, tall and terrible in grace. Bioluminescent lines etched her skin like constellations, living glyphs that shimmered with something deeper than light. Eyes opened, glowing with starlit hunger and knowing. She spoke. Not with rage, but reverence. The language twisted through, the air like a memory unraveling. The ship's battered translator choked, caught up, and finally processed 3 words. Mate, awaken, bond, complete. She did not strike him. Instead, she stepped forward like a queen inspecting prophecy made flesh. Her hand rose and hovered over his chest, fingers splayed as though she were drawing warmth from his heartbeat. She whispered a phrase, and the translator barely translated fast enough. The ritual of first touch is done. You are mine now, bonded one. He blinked. Words collided in his brain. Bonded? She smiled, warm and terrifying, and tilted her head as if savoring his confusion. Every failed syllable he offered in protest seemed to please her more. She misunderstood entirely. But in her mind, this wasn't misunderstanding. It was confirmation. She had awakened, and the stars had fulfilled their end of the pact. The ship responded to him now, Interfaces reshaped around his biosignature. Her authority bled into his. Without his presence, her commands carried no weight. The vessel had chosen Aelari, as he would come to know her, radiated both nobility and something stranger, devotion. Not worship, not lust. Something else. Ownership woven with awe. She touched his face with careful fingers, as if verifying that flesh and myth had finally intersected. He tried to say he wasn't hers. She heard instead that he was overwhelmed by love. He wanted to find the manual override, maybe even pilot the ship somewhere sane. But when he interfaced with the core, too fast, too reckless, his signal tripped a system buried in protocols older than any galactic language. A beacon fired. It screamed across parsecs in encoded pulses of Selyri command, wrapped in spectral harmonics only their kind could decipher. Dormant across space, receivers stirred. The message was simple. She lives. Aelari grew still. Her luminous eyes darkened like eclipsing suns. The stars will answer now, she said, voice laced with gravity. Jace muttered something about bad timing and worse luck. What stars? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Far away in shadowed corners of the galaxy, 3 forces received the signal. 1. A fleet of Selyri purists who had never accepted extinction, now mobilizing to restore their Empress and erase the dilution of their bloodlines. 2. A battalion from the Galactic Authority, coded to eliminate anything bearing Selyri genetic tags. They didn't want negotiation. They wanted ash. And 3, something older, buried in black space that had once whispered to the Selyri and had been waiting for them to speak again. The translation matrix wasn't built for nuance. It coughed and sputtered through linguistic drift like a drunk archaeologist reassembling sacred scripture. Words tumbled from Aelari's lips, like poetry crafted from fire and ancient steel, each syllable burdened with 10,000 years of extinct context. She spoke of cycles and bloodlines, of cosmic oaths and celestial convergence. The translation stuttered and twisted her meaning, offering phrases like soul tether, flesh rune, and eternal pairing. Jace only caught half, and that half was enough to set his nerves on fire. She believed the kiss, the impulsive, sarcastic joke on a frozen tomb, had been the rite of bonded awakening. A ritual once performed only between Selyri royal pairs to awaken life-bound mates at the edge of rebirth. Not symbolic, not casual. A sacred, irreversible fusion of destinies. Jace tried to explain. He waved his hands, backpedaled, muttered something about miscommunication, but the translator bent his words into confessions of divine love. When he said mistake, it echoed as destiny poorly timed. When he said joke, the system rendered it as ritual in jest to mask reverence. She placed her hand on his again, gentle and glowing. "Do not be afraid to feel," she whispered. He wasn't afraid to feel. He was afraid she'd bind his soul to hers with a gesture he didn't understand. Neither of them knew the truth was far stranger and far more dangerous than both their beliefs. Jace tried the hatch. Nothing. He swore, tried again, louder. This time, hoping volume might scare the door open. It didn't. The ship ignored his protests with the disinterest of a sovereign god. Every panel, every function, awaited only him. Not because he commanded it, but because he was now part of it. Navigation systems displayed unfamiliar constellations with paths etched in living circuits. The defense grid thrummed at his presence, heartbeat synced. Gravity adjusted when he moved, following not his steps, but his intent. The ship wasn't obeying, it was bonding. Aelari observed his panic with quiet amusement. "The vessel knows it's bonded," she said, as if explaining weather to a child. To her this was intimacy, sacred alignment. A soul ship responding to its destined co-pilot. To him it was a prison wearing perfume. She offered him a view of her stars, an invitation to see through her eyes, a symbolic gesture of unity and shared legacy. He heard conquest. He lunged for a console, hammered at keys, hoping to sever the tether, to wrest back control. Instead, the system lit gold. A pulse shot from the core. In ancient Selyri script, it spoke to the galaxy. The Empress rises. Her bonded awakens. Jace stared at the console. He just announced their marriage to the universe. The beacon stretched like a ripple across the interstellar dark, reaching places light rarely touched. In the shadowed corners of a dying moon, a coven of Selyri revivalists felt the call like fire under their skin. Their Empress, long lost, had returned, and with her a bonded consort, not Selyri but human. To them this wasn't heresy, it was prophecy. The old texts spoke of union beyond bloodlines. They called him the Skybreaker, the outsider who would awaken their empire anew. They prepared offerings. Warships long dormant rose from volcanic caves, banners unfurled, hope sharpened into zeal. Across the lawful void of galactic authority space, a crimson alert sounded in sterile command hubs. The AI linked to the Selyri War Memory Core flagged the beacon as a Class 1 containment breach. A relic-class bioweapon had reawakened. The Selyri weren't just back, they had a bonded pair. That was worse than war. Fleet Command issued kill orders, no trials, no negotiation, erasure. And beyond it all, past the Orion Veil, where the map ended and the stars whispered of silence, something ancient blinked awake. Once, the Selyri had sealed it in living dark. Now, their Empress called out again. It listened, and it moved. Back in the heart of the ship, Jace still stood at the console, unaware of the chaos he'd unleashed. Aelari turned to him with a smile that was both a promise and a prophecy. "They will come to kneel before us, my mate." He hoped to whatever gods were still on duty that she was wrong. The room glowed with a pulsing violet hum, lightless yet illuminated by the food itself. It levitated slightly above the crystalline dishes, organic filaments curling like tendrils of starlight, bioluminescent orbs rotating in harmonic rhythm. To Aelari it was sacred, an offering of union, a neural communion meal meant to blend thought, emotion, and ancestry. To Jace it looked like someone deep-fried a jellyfish and then programmed it to seduce him. He sat stiffly as she offered, the ceremonial first bite with reverence. He tried not to gag. One bite became two. Then the neural enzymes activated. Without warning, the meal bridged their minds. Flashes struck like lightning, images unfiltered by translation. He saw her kneel before a battlefield littered with glassed bones, her empire shattered in screams. She watched her sister die in orbit over a dead moon. She drifted alone in cold stasis, her soul kept awake in a dreamless hum. She saw him, young, dirty, hiding in a scrap hull from a raiding party. She felt the hunger in his stomach, the grief when his beacon to Earth never got answered, and the stupid, sarcastic loneliness that led him to kiss a frozen pod out of spite. For a single heartbeat, they were no longer alien, they were just tired. Then the meal's glow faded. Neural sync broken. They sat across from each other, silent, unsure whether what just passed between them had been a miracle or a mistake. Neither spoke. But something had changed, just enough to notice, too little to trust. The voice arrived. Without sound, a direct psychic relay from somewhere far across the stars. Aelari froze mid-step, eyes shifting to violet gold as the embedded message unfolded inside her mind. Selyri nobles, survivors clinging to fractured cryo-colonies, had stirred. They had seen the beacon. They had felt her rise. To them, she was Empress once more. Their words were wrapped in reverence, but beneath them echoed urgency, as the bond produced conception. She blinked, replayed the question to ensure no error. Then she turned, calm as ever, and asked Jace. He nearly spat his drink across the console. "Wait, what?" She nodded solemnly. "It is expected. The continuum must be restored." He backed, away as if she'd asked for his kidneys. Nope, hard pass. I'm not royalty. I'm not of the line. And I'm definitely not signing up to be your empire's designated baby daddy." Her gaze lingered on him, not insulted, not angry, just puzzled. He wasn't refusing her, he was refusing duty. In her world, love was a myth, duty was divine. But here stood a man with no gods, no empire, no purpose but survival. And he still had the gall to say no. For the first time since awakening, she faltered. Before she could respond, the ship trembled, an alarm pierced. The air proximity alert. The screen pulsed red. A Zealot-class vessel dropped out of warp like a fang in the void. Selyri purists, they had tracked the beacon. And now, they were staring at the unthinkable. An Empress who had bonded with a human. Their message was short. "You have defiled the bloodline. Prepare for reclamation." Jace looked at Aelari. For once, she didn't smile. The transmission came laced with static and contempt, a voice ancient and sharp. The zealots hailed her not as Aelari, but as she who strayed. They demanded confirmation. The bond, was it real? Or was the Empress a hostage of mammalian corruption? Aelari stood poised, her face a flawless mask of imperial serenity. She confirmed it. The bond was sacred, authenticated by rite, sealed by neural communion, witnessed by the stars. The zealots were not impressed. They required proof, physical, ritual, consummation, or annulment, no in between. Jace's voice cracked across the bridge like a blaster discharge. "Excuse me, what now?" The room fell tense. Aelari hesitated for the first time, torn between the gravity of tradition and the rising pulse of something deeper. Instinct, maybe, or defiance. She refused. Her people murmured, her own ranks. Doubt spread like a virus through their psyche-linked channels. The zealot ship held formation, weapons powered but unfired, a standoff without gunfire but no less dangerous. Aelari proposed retreat to a neutral system, to assess, regroup. Jace agreed quickly, thinking it meant safety. He didn't realize her destination was Vel Taral, a sacred world of judgment where empresses were either crowned or burned. Vel Taral shimmered in orbit like a wound stitched in light. Its surface pulsed with crystalline forests that sang in pressure waves, glowing veins running through its mountains like blood through glass. The moment the ship entered its atmosphere, ancient sigils ignited across its hull. The planet knew Aelari, and it knew Jace. At the landing site, relic towers rose in silence, sensors scanning them. The system accepted Jace's DNA. Not reluctantly, but completely. The bond was written into his skin now. Whatever he had triggered, he was part of it. Ceremonies began at once. Aelari was dressed in robes woven from memory silk, her crown reforged from the alloy of broken empires. Jace, meanwhile, was handed ceremonial armor, heavy, jagged, inscribed. In runes no one living could read, he was expected to swear an oath in a dead language, with a script that burned the eyes. He nearly passed out reciting it. The audience, zealots, nobles, remnants of the ancient priesthood, watched every breath, measured every blink. Some seemed hopeful, others enraged. None believed. Later, alone in the sacred observatory, Aelari pulled off her ceremonial mask. No more imperial diction, no riddles, just words, raw. "If you wish to walk away, do it now," she said. "But if you leave, I will not stop what's coming. I will become who they need. I will become war." Jace stared, not at her crown or her robes, but her eyes, not because he was ready, but because, for the first time, she sounded like someone who could break. He stayed, not out of certainty, but because he didn't want her to become that monster. Alone, Dr. Lys Tanaka had tracked the signal from halfway across the galaxy. Her ship touched down in a flurry of diplomatic overrides, bearing credentials from both the Galactic Authority and half-burned Selyri archives she'd risked her life to steal during the final war. Her presence was barely tolerated, but her knowledge, too, dangerous to ignore. She met them in the translation sanctum, pages of old glyphs burned into her retina implants. She didn't bow, didn't address Aelari as Empress. She simply said, "You got the ritual wrong." Silence. She continued. "The rite of the kiss wasn't meant to seal a bond. It was meant to test it." Jace blinked. Aelari paled. "It only activates," Lys explained, "if the one kissed is genetically predisposed to reject the bond. If the ritual ignites, it's not proof of unity. It's proof of resistance. A safeguard, a silent form of consent. A test of compatibility, not obedience." Aelari swayed not from anger, but confusion, shock, grief. Jace looked like he'd been sucker-punched by the universe itself. "So this whole time," he began, "it meant you shouldn't have bonded," Lys said quietly. And yet it worked. Truth cracked the room open like a fault line. The foundation of their so-called destiny had been built on a misfire. But the zealots didn't care. They had summoned the priesthood, and the final rite would begin, whether he agreed or not. The room felt too quiet for what needed to be said. Jace stood near the threshold, back braced against crystalline columns older than human history. Aelari watched him, unblinking, her ceremonial robes discarded like a truth she didn't want to wear. He didn't ask for clarity or forgiveness. He asked, the only question that mattered, "You've told me what you believe, but what do you want?" She didn't answer right away. Silence pulled taut between them, thick as the gravity between stars. Then quietly, "I don't know." Not a declaration, a confession. She had spent decades in slumber, dreaming of duty, empire, symbols. Her awakening had given her a bond, a path, a purpose, but not peace, not truth, not freedom. She hadn't wanted love. She had wanted certainty, and Jace, he hadn't wanted connection. He had wanted a payday, a salvage job big enough to buy, an island and vanish. Now they were wrapped in something sacred enough to shake empires and fragile enough to break with a breath. So they made a pact, survive the ritual, then walk away. But the universe wasn't done with them. Without warning, zealot operatives activated cloaked implants embedded in the old priesthood. They struck in silence, stunning Jace with neural blasts and dragging him through back corridors. Of the sacred palace, their intent was clear: purge the impurity, break the bond, restore the Empress, with or without her permission. When Aelari discovered the betrayal, her voice did not rise, her eyes didn't blaze. She simply said, "Then they will understand what I am, not what I was made to be." The temple blazed with song, voices layered in harmonic recursion, pulsing through the pillars of memory glass. Selyri from all castes gathered to witness their Empress ascend. The galaxy watched through shadowed relays and diplomatic proxies, each breath held for the climax. Aelari entered in silence. She wore full regalia, not as a symbol of surrender, but of confrontation. The priesthood bowed. The zealots did not. In the center of the sanctum, the blade awaited her, a double-edged relic of star steel forged in the final days of the Empire. Its meaning was absolute: choose the bond, ignite the bloodline. Refuse, and war would burn through 1,000 systems. Delay and death would claim them both. She approached alone. Then shouts echoed beyond the chamber doors. Jace burst through, breath ragged, robes scorched, flanked by defectors. Selyri, who had abandoned the old ways, who saw something beyond. Bloodlines and prophecy. Gasps rippled across the chamber. Weapons hissed to life. He stepped forward and knelt. But it was not submission. It was defiance with humility. Reverence without obedience. He looked up, voice raw but steady. "You don't get to tell her who she is, not anymore." The chamber reeled. Words had never struck so hard. He didn't declare love. He didn't beg for freedom. He declared the bond broken, but not out of hatred, out of choice. The right to walk away from the path carved by others, the right to build something new, unwritten. Aelari stood still. The sword glimmered at her feet, waiting. Her hands did not tremble. She lifted it, turned, and set it down. "I choose neither war nor marriage," she said. "I choose truth." No roar followed, no explosion, just silence. A silence so heavy it cracked the bones of tradition. Zealots faltered. The priesthood froze. Something ancient shattered in the quiet. An empire built not on weapons but on stories. The myth unraveled, and somewhere deep in the pulse core of the sacred planet, the first roots of a new truth began to grow. The temple, fractured in real time, not in stone but in certainty. Voices rose like a storm, priests invoking doctrine, zealots snarling accusations, nobles retreating behind ceremonial oaths. And at the center stood Jace, surrounded, held by force, as though his mere presence could collapse what centuries had built. He didn't resist, not because he couldn't, but because his fight was never against hands. It was against the minds that moved them. The accusation was ancient and sharp, contamination of the royal bloodline. Aelari stepped forward, and the air bent around her. A tremor of energy flared beneath her skin, visible only to those who remembered. What true power looked like. "Let him go," she said. But the command did not echo as it once had. The soldiers froze, conflicted, not conquered. Authority had become opinion. The illusion was gone, so she changed everything. "There will be no heir," she said, voice even, "and there will be no throne." The crown, etched in star steel and memory, glimmered atop the altar. Aelari touched it. Energy coiled at her fingertips. Then she released it. The crown ignited. Ceremonial light turned to real fire. The metal hissed as it cracked and bled molten arcs onto the sanctified stone. Gasps filled the temple, screams. A few knelt in protest. Some simply collapsed. But Aelari stood still, watching her crown melt. Jace looked up at her, bracing for some whispered thanks or sidelong glance. She didn't give him one. She didn't do it for him, she did it for herself. With the throne dissolved, the room became a battlefield without weapons, lines drawn in ideology, not blood. Zealots growled promises of secession, nobles argued over succession. The priesthood clutched relics and screamed for clarity from dead gods. Aelari listened to none of it. Instead, she opened her hand and activated the shard implanted in her palm, a last resort mechanism woven into the genome of every Selyri ruler. Order. Coda 0. No one recognized the term until the lights dimmed and the walls hummed. Then it hit. Across the Empire's remains, starships froze mid-maneuver. Weapon systems crashed. Noble command codes deactivated. Thousands of command nodes shut down in sequence. Entire fleets lost their hierarchical overlays. It was not conquest, it was erasure. The ability to rule had been written into their blood. She had just deleted the code. Cries broke out. "What have you done? You've doomed us. You've freed us," someone whispered. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Chaos rippled outward like a slow explosion. Too silent to stop, too loud to ignore. And in the middle of it all, Jace stood beside her. "You didn't destroy your empire," he said, voice low but clear. "You gave it back to them." The temple changed overnight. Gone were the banners of war and worship. In their place, circular seats, unmarked robes and cameras. Dozens of them. Thousands of lenses transmitting everything in real time to every known system with a receiver. The galaxy was watching, not because they believed in her guilt, but because they had never seen a monarch stand trial. Not for losing power, but for surrendering it. The charge was simple: treason. The courtroom buzzed with expectation. Priests muttered that the stars wept. Zealots hissed that order had collapsed. Civilians leaned forward, breathless. Aelari stood tall, no longer in royal dress but in common fabric. Her defense was not legal, it was philosophical. "I have not betrayed the Empire," she said. "I have betrayed the illusion that power makes us more than others." Her voice was soft, but it carried. "I gave you freedom. I did not command you to use it." Murmurs rippled. Then Jace rose, not as consort, not as alien, as witness. "I didn't ask for any of this," he said. "I kissed a frozen statue because I was lonely. I joked. She believed. And for a while, I let that be enough." He looked directly at the tribunal. But consent without understanding isn't real. Power without accountability isn't real. And love without choice is just a cage painted gold. Aelari said nothing. She didn't need to. The courtroom pulsed with silence. Then came the vote. Each priest stepped forward. Each cast representative. One by one they cast crystal shards into the judgment bowl. Red for guilt, white for innocence, gray for abstention. No one chose red. Most chose gray. Enough chose white, not enough to crown her, but enough to absolve her. She was not declared innocent of breaking the law. She was declared innocent in intent, a rare judgment, a dangerous one. Her sentence was exile, not into darkness, into light, to walk among your people as one of them. No throne, no titles, no chains, just Aelari. And in a galaxy that had only ever worshipped royalty or rebelled against it, she became something new, a precedent. The air no longer carried commands. No armored guards flanked them. No nobles whispered behind silk curtains. No crown weighed down her posture or his breath. Only two silhouettes walked side by side through the crumbled outer halls of a shattered temple, the night folding quietly around them. Jace didn't speak at first. The stars above seemed to hold their own kind of trial, vast and ancient, watching this quiet ending. Then simply he asked, "So, what do you want now?" She stopped at the edge of a broken balcony, scorched stone still warm from hours ago. Her silver hair caught a moonbeam, as if even the cosmos still remembered her title. But her voice didn't. "A name," she said. "One. That's mine, not theirs. No dramatics, no decree, just truth." He nodded, thoughtful. "Want me to give you one?" She turned to him, arched an elegant brow with the barest curve of a smile. "No. I'll find it myself." no resistance. No coldness, just choice. They stood like that, the ruin behind them glowing faintly with the echoes of firelight, the horizon ahead pulsing with the hum of freedom. No throne, no shackles, no destiny waiting in a bloodline, just two people. He lowered himself onto a jagged piece of fallen column. She followed without ceremony. They sat shoulder to shoulder, quiet in a way neither of them had known how to be before. Not warriors, not rulers, not fugitives, just alive. His hand moved slightly, almost unconsciously toward hers, and for once he didn't overthink it. He didn't expect a ritual or a binding. He just reached. She met him halfway. No grip, no claim, no ceremony. Fingers against fingers. Soft. Present. Not as a symbol of union, but as a sign of understanding. For the first time, they touched not because fate demanded it, but because they chose to. Together. The stars had not forgotten her, but they no longer saluted when she passed. Aelari walked through the dust of former glory. Once sacred halls turned to community shelters, cities stripped of banners and bows. No guards flanked her steps, no fanfare preceded her name. And still the whispers followed. Some villagers turned their backs, others spat. A few knelt in trembling awe until she gently urged them to stand. Jace watched her take each reaction, like a blade to the ribs, never flinching, never retaliating. She sat with miners to share bread. She listened to old grievances without defense. She slept beneath roofs not meant for royalty, side by side with the people her empire had forgotten. It wore her down. But it made her real. In each world, they passed through, once held tight by the Selyri's command lattice, change rooted in the footprints they left behind. Not through policy or proclamation, but through example. They didn't bring laws, they brought the absence of fear, and from that hollowed space, others began to speak, to vote, to lead. They were called exiles, but everywhere they went, new beginnings bloomed behind them. Not because she still had power, but because she had surrendered it. They found the remnants of the old regime among broken towers, shadows wrapped in ceremonial cloth, speaking in hushed voices like the weight of memory still choked them. The priesthood made their offer carefully. No trials, no public crowning, just a quiet reinstallation. A name returned, a title re-sanctified. The crown that once scarred her brow, waiting to be worn again. She didn't hesitate. No, she said, not out of cowardice, but conviction. Jace, standing behind her with a hand resting on the hilt of a toolkit, asked her later if she'd ever regret turning it down. She gazed at the horizon, where twilight met the jagged silhouette of a fallen Selyri tower. I was never meant to wear a crown that crushed others beneath it. It wasn't bitterness, it was clarity. And it echoed louder than any war drum ever had. She could have ruled again. Instead, she chose to begin again. And that, Jace realized, was harder. They didn't plan for it to become a movement, just a clearing, really. A soft patch of land beside a slow river on a forgotten moon, where orbiting satellites had long since gone silent. No one claimed it. So they did, not as rulers, but as gardeners. The first stone laid bore no emblem, only words, etched in deep, permanent script. Consent is the first law. It was meant to be a reminder. But it became something more. Word spread. Former rebels trickled in, quiet at first, cautious. Then came the star-born orphans and exiles of the Galactic Authority. Even the children of warlords arrived, not to conquer, but to learn. There were no thrones, no palaces, only open rooms, communal meals, and discussions that ran long into the night about what could be, now that nothing was enforced by blood. Aelari wore no regalia. She taught history, botany, negotiation. Jace helped build bridges, literal ones across the riverbanks, and metaphorical ones across species. When disputes arose, they weren't settled by decree but by dialogue, and slowly, something astonishing happened. The people stopped asking who led. They started asking what was fair, what was kind, what was needed. The sanctuary didn't become the center of a new empire. It became a seed, and from that seed grew a culture not born of revolution, but of resolution. One that knew crowns weren't heavy because of gold, but because of the weight of silence they demanded. They didn't declare utopia. They simply built a place where no one had to kneel. And in that space, without war or decree, a civilization was reborn, not through fire but through choice. The Selyri core systems lay dormant, stars cooled, glass planes stretched for centuries without a breath, temples entombed beneath collapsed heavens. Nothing lived here, nothing dared to. And yet, deep beneath strata untouched by blade or decree, a vault exhaled for the first time in eons. Its shell shimmered like frozen flame, not metal, not stone, something woven between thought and matter. The seal spun once slowly. Inside, lights pulsed in intervals synced not to time but to breath. It had counted every heartbeat, catalogued every activation, rebellion, collapse. But this signal, this flicker, was different. The signature it received was not flagged as Empress or Royal Line. Not as commander or catalyst, it was tagged early, a designation meant for a very specific kind of anomaly, one who awakened without instruction, one who chose to wake. Aelari had done something no protocol accounted for, and so the system adjusted. The vault didn't open, not fully, just enough for a whisper to slip into the deep bands of the stellar net. Protocol metabond incomplete, genetic chain unresolved, secondary alpha located. The stars blinked. A second pulse rippled outward, and far away something stirred, not in memory, not in vengeance, but in recognition. Something else had been waiting, and it had just been invited to finish the story. The wind rolled soft and warm across the gardened slopes of Yethra's Reach, a world untouched by battlements, where oxygen tasted of lightning and lilacs. Jace sat with his legs kicked out, fingers stained from rebuilding irrigation tubes with village kids who didn't care that he'd once triggered a galaxy-wide crisis. Aelari lay beside him on the grass. No robes, no rings. Her head tilted toward. The sound of laughter. Children chasing iridescent birds too dumb to fear being caught. Some of the children had her eyes. Some had his. Others carried features that belonged to both, and neither. The kind of future born not from thrones, but from broken ones. She asked softly, "If they come for us again, would you run?" He smiled. "I kissed a sleeping goddess once. I'd do it again." Her smile didn't need translation. For a moment they let silence say the rest. Two souls not bound by ceremony, but by choice made real through shared stubbornness. Above them, constellations tilted. Not in prophecy, in alignment. Something shifted in the galactic weave. A corridor opened, a path not scripted, not ordained, but possible, and deep in the void, an eye blinked. Not to destroy, to answer. The next story would not begin in glass coffins or genetic vaults. It would begin with voices raised, not to command, but to ask. And that, above all else, was the legacy no empire could erase. Not war, but a spark that chose not to die.